Have you ever felt completely at peace and incredibly lonely at the exact same time? I have. And it doesn't make a damn lick of sense. Those two emotions shouldn't even go together. But don't tell me they can't. I felt them. And the strangest part is the loneliness didn't take away the peace. That's what has been screwing with my head ever since. This happened on the third night at the lake. And I wasn't there searching for some profound answer about my life. Hell, I wasn't even supposed to be there. I'd gone to the lake for one night. One became two, two became three, and eventually I ended up staying four. And on the third night, while I was looking out across the dark water, something hit me like a sucker punch from somewhere in the back. Peace, real peace. The kind that's, still relatively new to me. And right there beside it was loneliness. And I still can't really explain it. There was nothing wrong with that moment. That's very important. I was perfectly content. I was enjoying myself. And I didn't need anything to change. And yet, that loneliness feeling was every bit as real as the peace I was feeling. And I've thought about the dark water, and I've thought about the fact that environments like that used to be, like that used to have kids around, family, noise, a completely different chapter of my life. Maybe some of that was involved. I don't really know. And I'm not going to make up an answer, just so this story has one, but that's what actually got me thinking. Why do I think there has to be an answer at all? I've been rebuilding my life for, a little over 4 years. And when your old life blows apart, one of the first things that you're looking for, I guess, is a roadmap. I did anyway. Something to tell me what to do. Tell me how to fix this. Tell me where I'm supposed to go from here. Tell me when I'm finally going to feel normal again. So we look everywhere. Books, Google, therapists, people who've lived through something similar. And all those places can give us something. But I've discovered, something through actually living this. Nobody can give me a universal answer, to my life or for my life because there isn't one. My road is mine, yours is yours. But sitting beside that lake made that impossible for me to ignore because what book was going to prepare me for that? What Google search explains exactly what I felt? Who could have told me that after everything that I've lived through, that I'd eventually find this incredible peace and then somehow get sucker punched by loneliness right in the middle of it? Hell, I was the one feeling it and I couldn't explain it. And that's life, and maybe I've been looking at starting over wrong right from the very beginning. We call it rebuilding, but rebuilding sounds like I should have a set of blueprints. Like somewhere there's a finished picture, and my job is to put all the pieces back together until my life looks right again. But I don't want to put the old life back together. That life brought me here. There is no road back from it. I'm going somewhere I've never been. So, how the hell could there already be a map? And that brings me back to why I was even at the lake on the third night. You know, I wasn't supposed to be. I went for one night. Had I followed the plan, I would have packed my shit the next morning and gone home. But I was enjoying myself, so I stayed. Then I stayed again, and it ended up being 4 nights. But that's how I live now, unscripted. And I'm not talking about being irresponsible or never knowing what I'm doing tomorrow. I'm talking about something much bigger. I spent a hell of a lot of my life, living towards planned outcomes. Become this, build that, get here, accomplish this. Then eventually, life will look like the way it's supposed to look. And life happened while I was busy making all those other plans. Somewhere along the way, I realized something. A planned outcome isn't discovery. So if I decide exactly what my life is supposed to become, and then spend the next 20 years forcing myself towards it, I'm writing another script in my life. And I've already done that. I'm not interested. Now I'm just living. Sometimes that means rediscovering things that were always part of me, fishing, camping, being outdoors, whatever, all of it. But going somewhere simply because I feel like going. Things that I lost somewhere along the way. But sometimes it means new discovery. Something I didn't know about myself yesterday. That's what happened at that lake. I discovered that apparently I can experience incredible peace while another part of me feels something completely different. I didn't plan that. I didn't go searching for it for sure. It just happened because I was there to live it. Had I followed the original plan, I'd have been home 2 days earlier. Think about that. You know, the experience that has had me thinking this deeply about my own life, wasn't on the itinerary. I can promise you that. And that's why I think people starting over can drive themselves crazy looking for the answer. I know I did. We think there's some destination called healed or rebuilt or happy or successful or whatever word we're chasing at the time. And if somebody could just give us the directions, we'd get there. 4 years into this, I'm not convinced that destination exists the way I once thought it did. Because I'm not trying to arrive at my life anymore. I'm trying to live the damn thing to its fullest. And those are two very different things. I still don't know why I felt loneliness sitting, beside the lake. Maybe someday I'll understand it. Maybe I won't. But here's what I do understand. That feeling didn't mean that I lost my peace. That's that's what surprised me the most. The peace stayed. And maybe, that's just another discovery that I couldn't have gotten from somebody else's roadmap. I had to experience it. And that's why I can't just sit here and give somebody starting over a list of 10 things to do and promise they'll end up where I am. Hell, I don't even know where I'm going. And for the first time in my life, I'm okay with that. Going to the lake for one night and staying 4 on the third night, I experienced something I still can't explain. I mean, it's just that simple. And somewhere in all of that, I realized I'm not lost just because I don't know where the road ends. I mean, at 55 years old, I'm still rediscovering pieces of myself. And I'm still discovering completely new ones. And I'm done trying to write the ending before I even live the story. Because after these 55 years, there's one thing that I know for damn sure. Life is going to happen while you're making other plans. There's a saying on that for a reason. It's true. But this, I think that I'll be there for it this time. Y'all, my thought for today. And I'll see you in the next one.